The notes had been folded into the back pages of the Manitoba Free Press, between an advertisement for seed catalogs and one for a patent cough remedy. She had read it 3 times before she understood that she was considering it. Saskatchewan Territory. Widow man with established quarter section, cattle and grain, seeks capable woman, cook and keep house. Arrangement to be discussed. Apply general delivery, Heron Flats. She had been in Winnipeg 11 months by then. The position at the laundry had ended in October when the owner's wife decided she could manage the books herself. The room above the hardware on Portage Avenue was paid through the end of January. After that, she had enough for another 6 weeks if she was careful, and then she had the kind of nothing that doesn't announce itself until it's already arrived. Her husband had been gone 2 years. A dry summer and a wet autumn and a debt that had grown the way debts do, quietly and then all at once, until the land they had broken together went back to the bank, and she went to the city with her trunk and her sewing basket, and the particular knowledge that she was starting again at 31, and that this time there was no one starting with her. She wrote the letter on a Wednesday evening and posted it Thursday morning, and told herself she would not think about it again until she had a reply. She thought about it every day for 2 weeks. His answer came on the 14th. 2 sentences. The 1st of March suits. I will meet the stage at Heron Flats. The handwriting was small and even, no loops, no ornamentation. She read it twice, put it in her coat pocket, and sat at the window watching the street below until the lamp across the way went out. The stage from Regina took most of a day. She had 1 trunk, her sewing basket, and a paper parcel of bread and hard cheese she had made that morning, because she did not know what food would look like on the other side of this journey. And she had learned not to arrive at an unknown place hungry if she could help it. The land opened up west of the city and kept opening. By mid-afternoon, there was nothing between her and the horizon in any direction but snow-flattened grass and the occasional stand of poplar, bare-branched, the trunks white against a white sky. She had grown up on the prairie, and still the size of it, in winter especially, had a way of pressing itself against you until you felt either very small or very clear. She watched it through the frost-edged window and felt both at once. Heron Flats was a main street and a grain elevator, and the stage platform, which was a single plank, raised perhaps 8 inches from the frozen ground. There were 4 buildings of any consequence and a dozen smaller ones still working out what they wanted to be. She stepped down from the stage into a cold that was different from Winnipeg cold, drier, with a wind that moved through rather than around. And she stood on the platform with her trunk beside her and looked at the town. There was no one moving toward her. She waited 15 minutes by the clock in the window of the dry goods across the road. A man came out of the livery and went into the hardware and did not come out. 2 women passed on the far boardwalk and looked at her and looked away. A dog crossed the road at an angle, nose down, purposeful. She opened her sewing basket. There was mending in it she had started on the stage, a wool stocking with a run at the heel. She worked slowly, her fingers cold enough that the needle was difficult to hold, and she did not look up each time she heard a sound from the street. At the half hour, she put the stocking back and stood. The man at the stage office had a ledger open on his counter and did not look up when she came in. She told him the name of the man she was looking for and the section number that had been on the envelope of his letter. He looked up then with the expression people use when they are deciding how much to tell a stranger. He said the farm was 9 miles north. He said the man had come in last week for feed and had seemed, in his opinion, in some hurry to get back. He said there was a livery if she needed. The horse they gave her was a bay with a calm eye and a tendency to drift left on an open road, which she corrected each time without comment. The man at the livery had offered to send his boy, but she had said she knew the way, which was not exactly true. She had the section number and a rough description of the road north from the elevator, and she trusted herself to figure out the rest. The light was already dropping by the time she cleared the last of the buildings and turned north. The road was packed snow and rutted deep by wagon wheels. The grass on either side bent flat and silver in the late sun. She kept her back straight and her hands steady on the reins and looked at the land the way she always did when she was arriving somewhere for the first time. Not with judgment, not yet, but with attention. The slope of the ground, the direction the drifts had formed, where the water would go in spring. The farm came into view at the end of a long, straight stretch, set back from the road by a windbreak of spruce that had been planted young and were just now beginning to earn their keep. A house, low and wide, the boards weathered to silver gray, but set square, no lean to the walls. A barn behind it, substantial, with a new section on the north end still raw lumber. A corral, a granary, a small shed that might have been a smokehouse or a root cellar or both. She noted the new lumber on the barn. Someone had been building recently and had run out of either money or season. She brought the horse into the yard and stopped. The barn door opened before she had tied up. He came out into the cold without a coat. A man in his early 40s, she would have said, with the kind of build that comes from outdoor work and the kind of face that has learned to keep its own counsel. He stopped a few feet out and looked at the horse and then at her. She climbed down herself and tied the bay to the corral post. He said he had expected her on Thursday. She said the stage ran on Tuesdays and Fridays. He considered this. Then he said she had better come in. The house was warm, cook stove going, the iron hot enough that the room held its heat well, and she noticed that immediately. The stove worked and he knew how to run it, which was not nothing. A table with 2 chairs, a shelf with supplies stacked neatly, flour, salt, a small tin of baking powder, dried beans in a jar, a window on the south wall with a flour sack curtain, washed enough times that it had gone from white to the color of cream. He had made the curtain, or someone had made it, and he had kept it, and she did not yet know which, and she filed that away. He put her trunk in a room at the back, small with a window that faced east, a cot with 2 blankets and a hook on the wall for her coat. The floor was level. The walls had no gaps she could see. She pressed her hand against the outer wall and felt no cold coming through the chinking. He came back and stood in the doorway. He said supper was a few hours off. He said the cattle needed checking and he would be in the barn until dark. He said she could do as she liked in the kitchen. She said she would start supper. He looked at her for a moment as though he was going to say something about that, and then decided not to. He went out. She stood in the kitchen and took inventory the way she had learned to do in the lean years. Flour, sufficient. Lard in a crock by the door half full. Salt pork in the cold room off the back entry. Dried peas. 2 onions going soft but usable. A cured ham hanging from a ceiling hook. Not much left on it, but enough for a pot if she added the peas and let it go long enough. She started the pot. Then she went outside in the remaining light and found the outhouse and the woodpile, both where she would have put them. She found the well, a good solid cover and a windlass that moved without complaint. She found the chicken shed around the back of the barn, small and tight-built, 8 birds that came to the door when she opened it and regarded her with the suspicious interest of creatures that have learned to be cautious about strangers. She counted the birds. She checked the feed bin. She looked at the water pan. It was clean and recently filled, which meant he had been here in the last few hours, which meant he had been managing this himself. She looked at the birds more carefully. They were not thin. They were not particularly well fed, but they were not in distress. He had been keeping them alive without knowing quite how, and there was something in that she recognized. The particular careful effort of a person doing their best with a thing outside their knowledge. She closed the shed and went back in and adjusted the pot. He came in at dark, stomped his boots on the mat she had not put there yet, and he had apparently had there all along, and washed at the basin with the efficiency of a man who has done the same thing at the same time for years. She put the pot on the table and set 2 bowls, and he sat and she sat and they ate. The soup was good. The ham had given up what it had to give, and the peas were soft, and the onions had dissolved into the broth the way onions do when you give them enough time, becoming the flavor of everything without being a thing you could point to. He said nothing for a while. Then he said it was a good soup. She said the ham was nearly done. He said he knew. He said he had been meaning to get another from Osgood at the butcher in town, but the roads had been difficult in January. She noted the name, Osgood, and the fact that he had a regular arrangement for meat and had not managed to maintain it, and she said nothing about either. After supper, he pushed back from the table and looked at the window the way men look at windows when there is something outside they are responsible for. He said the temperature would drop tonight. He said the cattle were in the south pasture and he wanted to check the fence line before full dark. She said she would clear the table. He put his coat on and went out, and she washed the bowls and dried them and set them back on the shelf where they had been, which was not the most convenient place, but was clearly where they lived. Then she put the leftover soup in the cold room and banked the fire in the stove the way she had learned from her mother, the way that kept the heat steady without eating wood all night. She sat at the table with the stocking from her basket and worked the heel by lamplight until she heard his boots on the step. He came in and stood by the stove with his hands out toward the iron, not looking at her. He said the east corner of the fence was going to need work before the thaw. He said the posts were heaving. She said she had noticed the new lumber on the barn. She asked if he had done that himself. He said he had. He said the north wall had given in the blizzard in December, and he had spent most of January rebuilding. She looked at his hands near the stove. The knuckles were scarred in the particular way that comes from cold work with tools. She said it looked solid. He said it held, at least. She went to bed early. The room was cold, but not dangerously so, and she lay under the 2 blankets with her coat on top and listened to the house settle and the wind move across the roof. Through the east window, the sky was clear and enormous, and the stars were the kind of hard bright that only comes in deep cold. She had not seen stars like that in Winnipeg. There had been too many buildings, too much lamp smoke. She thought about the fence posts heaving. She thought about the ham and the arrangement with Osgood that had lapsed. She thought about the flour sack curtain and the way he had washed his hands at the basin in exactly the same way twice. Now, right hand first, then left, 3 passes each. She was not assessing him. She was learning the place. In the morning, she was up before the sky had fully committed to daylight. She had the stove going and water on before she heard him move in the other room. He came out already dressed and stopped when he saw the lamp lit and the kettle going. He said he usually made his own coffee. She said she had made it already. He sat at the table. She poured. He wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the window where the frost had come up on the inside of the glass in the night, feathering out from the corners in patterns that looked like something between a fern and a river delta. She had noticed the same thing and had thought the same thought about rivers. She asked about the cattle. He told her. 42 head, mixed. The bull had a lame foreleg that he was watching. The hay would last to April if the winter didn't extend, and he had reason to think it wouldn't. The geese had gone south late, and the old-timers read that as a sign of a short winter, though he was not sure he believed in those signs or didn't believe in them either, only that he had noticed. She listened without looking up from her cup. When he was done, she asked what he had planted last season and what had come in. He told her, wheat, mostly, a quarter of oats. The yield had been fair in the east field and poor in the west, and he thought it was the drainage, but he hadn't had time to address it. She said the west field looked lower from the road. He said it was. She said it would need tiling or ditching before it would perform reliably. He said he knew that. She said there might be a way to do the near end before seeding without a full drainage project, depending on the clay content of the soil, which she didn't know yet. He looked at her across the table. She had been on his property less than 12 hours. He did not say that. Finished his coffee and stood and pulled his coat from the peg. He said he would be with the cattle most of the morning. She said she would be here. After he left, she cleaned the kitchen properly for the first time. Not because it was dirty. It wasn't, or not badly, but because she needed to know where everything was, and the only way to know that was to touch it all. The shelf above the stove. Flour, baking powder, salt, a tin of dried herbs she opened and smelled, sage and something else she couldn't identify, rosemary maybe, gone mostly to dust. The drawer beside the stove, a bone-handled knife, a ladle, a spoon with a crack in the handle, but still sound, a flat piece of iron she didn't immediately recognize, and then understood was a lid lifter, older than anything else in the kitchens. She set it back carefully. She found the ledger on the shelf by the window. She didn't open it. She noted where it was. She spent the middle of the morning on the chickens. She mucked the shed herself, which needed doing, and spread new straw from the bale in the corner of the barn, and checked each bird carefully. 2 of them were losing feathers around the neck, which could be several things, and she couldn't be certain yet which. She looked at the feed and thought it was low on what it needed to be. There was a creek she had seen from the road, south of the property, and she thought she might find what she was looking for along the bank once the snow eased. But for now, she improvised with what the kitchen could spare. A bit of dried sage, some crushed shell from the 2 eggs she found in the nesting box. She was back in the kitchen with bread started before he came in for the noon meal. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the kitchen, and then at her, and then at the bread bowl on the table. He sat. She put soup from the night before onto heat and cut the last of a heel of bread she had found in the box by the stove. He said the bull's leg was no worse. She said that was good. He said he thought the lame leg had been caused by something under the hoof, a stone or ice packed in, and he had cleared it out but was not certain he had gotten everything. She said she could have a look if he wanted. He looked at her. She said she had dealt with cattle. Not a large herd, but enough. Her husband's farm had run 30 head at its highest. He said the bull wasn't gentle. She said she wasn't asking him to hold her hand. A pause, not a hostile one. He looked at the bread bowl and then at her, and something in his expression shifted the way things shift when a person recalculates. He said she could have a look after dinner. She did. The bull was not gentle, and she did not pretend he was. She talked to him the whole time, low and even, not words that meant anything, just a consistent sound, and he stood for her long enough. She found the trouble, a sliver of something. Wood, she thought, or hardened matter, packed against the frog, and she worked it out with the pick he handed her through the stall rails, and the bull didn't like it, but he didn't kick either. She came out of the stall and handed back the pick. He was looking at her with the expression he had used at the table, the recalculating one. He said not many people could do that with that particular animal. She said she had met worse. He put the pick on its hook and they walked back to the house in the cold and said nothing on the way. But it was not the silence of 2 people with nothing to say. The weeks passed in the way that weeks pass in winter on a prairie farm, marked not by dates but by tasks. She learned the kitchen the way she had intended, and the kitchen learned her in return, the way a space does when someone inhabits it with purpose. She learned where the cold came in, the east corner of the back entry, the gap around the stovepipe collar, and addressed them with what she had, rags and dried moss from the woodpile and a strip of oilcloth she found in the barn. He noticed without commenting. She noticed that he noticed. She found the creek in late February, on a morning when the cold had eased enough to make walking tolerable. She went south along the fence line and found the cut bank where the snow was thinner and began working at the frozen edge with a stick and found what she had been looking for. Not nettle yet, too early for that, but the dried stems from the fall that told her where it grew. She came back with frozen hands and a stick wound with dried plant matter, and he was at the kitchen table with the ledger open when she came in. He closed it without hurry. She did not look at it. She held up the stems and told him what they were and what she needed them for. He said he had not known that grew along the creek. She said it grew along most creek banks. She said she would be able to harvest properly in 6 weeks or so, and in the meantime she could work with the dried material. He nodded. He looked at her hands, which were red from the cold. She set the kettle on. He said, still looking at the ledger cover, that the account at Murdoch's store in town was carrying a balance from October. She waited. He said he could square it when he sold the oats, which he planned to do in March. He said in the meantime there were some things she might need for the house that he could not yet get. She asked what the balance was. He told her. She thought about that. Then she said there were things on her list that could wait and things that couldn't, and she would sort them accordingly. He said he wasn't asking her to do that. She said she wasn't doing it because he asked. A silence. He looked at the window. She poured the tea. She went to town with him on the Thursday. It was his regular day. She had learned that in the first week. They went in the cutter. The horse's breath coming in great white plumes in the morning cold, the runners hissing on the packed snow of the road. She sat beside him on the board seat with her list in her apron pocket, and they did not talk much on the way in, which suited her. The woman at Murdoch's was named Irene Lacrosse. She introduced herself without being asked, which told something about her. And she looked at the list with the careful attention of a person who has been watching what people buy for long enough to read a situation in a grocery order. She said the account would carry what was on the list, though it was tight. She crossed off the lamp oil herself. She could stretch what was in the lamp another week with careful use and pushed the paper back across the counter. Irene Lacrosse looked at what remained and then looked at her. She said she had heard there was someone helping out at the farm. She said she was keeping the house through winter. Irene Lacrosse said she had heard that. She said it carefully, the way people in small towns say things they have already decided, with a little weight on the end of it. She met her eyes and said nothing. On the way out, she passed the hardware and saw a paper of roofing nails in the window display that she had not put on the list because she had decided they were not urgent. She stood at the window for a moment and then went on. In the cutter, on the way home, with the box of supplies at her feet and the cold coming up through the boards, he said without preamble that Irene had told him about the lamp oil when he came in to pay. She said it had seemed the practical choice. He said the account would be settled in March. She said she knew. He said he had seen her at the hardware window. She said the north roof on the chicken shed was going to need attention before spring melt. He looked at the road ahead. She could see his breath and the way it moved when he exhaled. He said he would get the nails. She said she knew how to nail a roof. He said he didn't doubt it. They drove the last 2 miles without talking. The farm came into sight at the bottom of the long slope, the spruce windbreak and the barn roof and the smoke from the chimney. And she looked at all of it and thought about the fence line and the west field and the creek and the 8 birds in the shed and the ledger on the shelf and the new lumber on the north wall of the barn. And she thought about what a place looks like when someone is fighting for it and what it looks like when someone has stopped. And she knew which one this was. March came and the cold broke in the way a prairie cold breaks. Not gradually, not gently, but all at once, 3 days of wind from the south that turned the yard to mud and filled the creek south of the fence line and woke something up in the soil that she could smell through the kitchen window in the morning. He sold the oats. The account at Murdoch's was settled, and there was enough besides for the roofing nails and a half cord of lumber for the fence posts and 2 new laying hens from a farm 5 miles east, whose owner, a man named Garth Ennis, met them in the yard and sized her up with the frank curiosity of someone who has been wondering and now has an answer to look at. She ignored it with the ease of practice. The new hens settled into the shed within a week. All 8 of the originals were laying by the 3rd week of March, which was more than he had expected and exactly what she had aimed for. She showed him the supplement, the dried nettle she had harvested from the creek bank, the wood ash from the stove, the crushed shell from the eggs. She showed him the proportions without making it a lesson, just standing at the bin and mixing it the way you show someone something when you expect they'll need to do it themselves someday. He watched and said he would have thought the ash would be bad for them. She said most people thought that. He said how did she know it wasn't? She said her mother had kept 60 birds on a homestead north of Brandon and had used the same supplement for 20 years. He was quiet a moment. He said she had not mentioned her mother before. She said there had not been occasion. He said carefully that he had not meant to pry. She said he hadn't. They were standing in the chicken shed in the thin morning light, the birds moving around their feet in their quick, small-headed way, and the smell of clean straw was the smell of something that had been fixed. Not perfectly, not completely, but fixed enough to be useful again. She walked past him out the door, and he fell into step beside her back toward the house. Not close, just alongside, the way 2 people walk when they have stopped needing to measure the distance. The fence line took them 3 days in April, him digging out the heaved posts, her hauling rails and fitting them while he moved to the next. On the 2nd afternoon, she split wood for an hour because the pile by the back door was getting low and he was busy with the corner post that had been the worst of the lot. And she found that she had stopped thinking about whether the work was hers to do and had simply started doing it, which was different from how she had been in the first weeks, and she was aware of the difference. He came around the corner of the barn and stopped when he saw the wood pile. She drove the axe into the chopping block and went to wash her hands. At supper that evening, he said nothing about the wood. He passed the bread without being asked and poured her coffee before his own, and said the east corner of the fence was the best it had been. In 3 years, maybe 4. She said that was good. He said it was more than good. He said it in a plain way, without looking at her directly, but with a weight to it that told her he was not talking only about the fence. She ate. Outside, the light was lasting longer now, the sky staying pale at the western horizon until nearly 8. And through the window she could see the granary and the barn roof and the stand of spruce and the beginning of green at the edge of the yard where the snow had retreated. He said, after a while, that he had written the advertisement in January. He said she probably knew that. She said she did. He said he had written it because the farm needed more than one person, and he had known that for 2 years and had not wanted to admit it. She waited. He said what he had not known, writing it, was what kind of more than one person he was asking for. She looked at him. He was looking at the window. He said she had come and taken the thing he had offered, which was not much, and made it into something he had not had the capacity to imagine. She said she had not come expecting a great deal. He said he knew. He said she had been clear about what she expected, and she had not expected it from him. She had brought it herself. He pushed back from the table and stood, and she thought he was going to his coat, but he didn't. He stood in the middle of the kitchen with the lamplight on his face and looked at her the way a person looks at something they have made a decision about and are no longer uncertain of. He said he would like her to stay, not through winter, not on arrangement. He said it simply, the way he said everything, without embellishment or apology or anything that would give her rooms to misunderstand. She looked at him standing there. The lamp was low and the kitchen was warm, and outside the yard was settling into dark in the slow way it did now, spring dark, with a particular softness to it. She thought about the letter she had written in January, practical, capable, willing. She had meant all of it. She had not known, writing it, what willingness could grow into. She had not known there was a word on the other side of it that she was moving toward. She stood up from the table. She crossed to where he was standing. She put her hand flat against his chest, the way she had tested the ice on the creek in February, with her weight held back and her attention fully forward. He covered her hand with his, just that. The lamp moved. Somewhere across the yard, the cattle shifted and settled. The fire in the stove found a new piece of wood and took hold. Neither of them said anything for a long time, and the silence was the good kind, the kind that means there is nothing left that needs to be said. Spring came in properly after that. The seeding was done in May, and done well. She had taken a soil sample from the West Field in late April and walked it down to the Dominion Lands office in town. And the man there had told her what she already suspected about the clay content. And they had addressed the near end of the drainage problem with 4 days of ditch work. And it had held through the first hard rain, and she had stood at the edge of the field afterward with mud on her boots and watched the water run where she had intended it to run, which was one of the better feelings she knew. The woman from Murdoch stopped her on the main street in June and said the farm was looking prosperous. Said she had heard from 2 separate people that it was the best-kept quarter section in the district. She thanked her and kept walking. She had bread in the oven. He was at the kitchen table when she came in, the ledger open, and for the first time in her experience in credit rather than debt. He looked up when she came in. She tied her apron. She looked at the ledger from across the table. He said it was the best spring he had seen on this land. She said it was a good year. He said it wasn't only the year. She didn't answer that. She started the bread, pressing it down with the heels of her hands the way her mother had shown her, the dough pushing back the way good dough does when it's had enough time to come into itself. Outside, the summer light was long and generous, the grass in the east pasture high and green, and the chickens moving through the yard in their reliable, busy way, and the barn roof solid above it all, and the fence line straight to the horizon. And somewhere along the creek south of the property the nettle was growing tall and unhurried in the July sun. The ledger lay open on the table. The bread rose. They did not need to say anything else.